Chloe Walker tugged on the handle of her suitcase as it clattered along the sidewalk as she walked from the cab stand to her parents' house in Seattle. The spring air was cool, and it smelled like wet grass after a morning rain. She adjusted her backpack on her shoulder and looked up at the familiar two-story house with gray shingles and white trim. The kitchen windows glowed a warm yellow, and Chloe couldn't help but smile as she imagined her mom, Madison, making dinner while her dad, Ethan, sat at the table with his laptop. But the smile faded quickly. Their calls hadn't sounded right in the last few months. Too short, too many, it's okay. She shook her head, clearing the thoughts, and pressed the doorbell. The door swung open almost immediately. Madison, in a sweatshirt and with her ponytail unkempt, was wiping her hands on a tea towel. Her face lit up with joy. "Chloe, oh my God, you're here." She threw the towel over her shoulder and pulled her daughter into a hug. "How was your flight? Has California ruined you yet?" Chloe laughed, snuggling into her mother's arms. She smelled of lemon soap and something else, new gym gel, maybe. The flight was fine. Only my neighbor on the plane snored like he was starting a saw. She pulled away, looking into the house. "Where's Dad?" Madison tensed slightly, but then waved her hand as if swatting away a fly. "In the office, as usual. Investors, calls, that sort of thing." She rolled her eyes, but her smile was strained. "Come on, I was just making pasta. Are you hungry?" Chloe nodded, dragging her suitcase into the hallway. The house smelled of garlic and basil, but it was unusually quiet. Usually, you could hear snatches of Ethan's loud voice coming from his office. He always spoke on the phone as if he was trying to be heard over the noise of a stadium. Now it was quiet. Chloe glanced at the closed door of his office as Madison led her into the kitchen. "Mom, are you okay?" Chloe put her backpack down by the table and sat down on a high chair. "You seem, I don't know, different." Madison glanced over her shoulder as she stirred sauce on the stove. "Different? That's because I'm an athlete now." She winked, but then turned back to the stove. "Triathlon, you know, cycling, running, swimming. I'm training for Ironman 70.3 in Hawaii." "Really?" Chloe raised an eyebrow at her mother. Madison had always been fit, but now her arms seemed stronger and there was a sharpness to her movements, like someone who was used to keeping up a tempo. "That's cool, Mom. When did you get into this?" "A couple months ago." Madison shrugged, dumping spaghetti into boiling water. "Jordan, my coach, said I could, so I thought, why not? I gotta keep in shape while you kids are running around campus." Chloe chuckled, but something inside her prickled. Her mother had never called herself in shape before. It was something new, foreign. She wanted to ask about Jordan, but then her phone vibrated in her jeans pocket. A text from a friend in film school. "Are you home yet? Tell me how Seattle is." Chloe smiled, but put the phone down, deciding to answer later. "What does Dad think of your triathlon?" she asked, watching Madison swipe a drop of sauce off the edge of the pot. "Oh, he's—" Madison hesitated, turning her attention to draining the pasta. "He's busy, you know. Startup, investors from Asia, that kind of thing. We don't really talk about it." Chloe frowned. Her parents had always been a team, Madison with her literature classes and Ethan with his financial schemes. But there was something evasive in her mother's voice now. She was about to ask more, but the office door creaked and Ethan walked into the kitchen. He looked tired, his shirt was slightly wrinkled, and there were shadows under his eyes. But when he saw Chloe, he broke into a smile. "Hey, student." He came over and hugged her tightly, smelling of coffee and aftershave. "When did you get so big? I thought you were still my little pigtailed girl." "Dad, I'm 19. Chloe rolled her eyes, but smiled, hugging him back. "Are you okay? Still conquering the world?" Ethan chuckled, walking away to the coffee maker. "I'm trying. These investors from Shanghai are going to squeeze everything out of me." He poured himself a coffee, not even glancing at Madison. "How's your film department going? Are you making blockbusters yet?" "Just short films so far," Chloe shrugged, watching him stir the sugar in his mug. "But I'm working on a script." Maybe I'll film you and your mom as a family drama. Madison snorted as she spooned the pasta onto plates. Oh, we're too boring for your drama, Khloe. She set the plate in front of her daughter. Eat while it's hot. Ethan sat down at the table, but instead of a plate, he picked up the laptop that was lying in the corner. He opened it, and the screen illuminated his face with a blue light. Ethan, Madison looked at him, holding up a spoonful of sauce. Would you like to eat with us? The calls can wait. I have a meeting with Tokyo in 10 minutes, he said, without looking up from the screen. I'll catch up later. Khloe looked at her mother. Madison pressed her lips together, but said nothing, only slamming the pot on the stove. Khloe felt her chest tighten. She picked up a fork and twirled the spaghetti, but her appetite was gone. Mom, tell me about this Ironman, she said, trying to break the silence. It's not just a run, right? Madison perked up as she sat down opposite him. Not easy. It's 1.9 kilometers of swimming, 90 kilometers of cycling, and 21 kilometers of running, all in a row without stopping. She smiled, but her eyes remained serious. Jordan says I'm ready. Well, almost. So Jordan, Khloe narrowed her eyes, trying to tease her mother, is this your personal fitness guru? Oh, come on, Madison laughed, but her cheeks were slightly pink. He's a physical therapist, he knows his stuff. Without him, I probably would have broken something by now. Ethan coughed without looking up from his laptop. Physical therapist, huh? His voice was even, but Khloe caught a hint of edge. It's good to have someone watching your knees. Madison froze, but then shrugged. Someone has to, since you're busy saving a startup. She stood up, putting the empty pan in the sink. Khloe looked back and forth between them. Ethan continued to type, and Madison began washing the dishes, even though the dishwasher was right next to her. The silence hung like a heavy curtain. Khloe took a bite of bread to keep herself occupied, but the question was spinning in her head. What was going on? Dad, will you come to dinner tomorrow? She tried to sound light. I want to tell you about my script. Ethan looked up, his face softening. Sure, Khloe. I'll be there tomorrow. He rubbed his temples. It's just that this neighborhood, it's wearing us all out. I understand, Khloe nodded, but her anxiety was growing inside. She glanced at Madison, who was now scrubbing the stove as if it were her own, a mortal enemy. After dinner, Khloe went up to her old room. She threw her suitcase on the bed and collapsed next to it, staring at the ceiling. The stars she and her dad had glued together when she was 10 still glowed in the dark. She pulled out her phone and chatted with a friend. It's strange at home, she wrote. My parents are somehow not together or something. The answer came a minute later. Wow, what do you mean? They're arguing. Khloe thought, looking at the glowing stars. They weren't fighting, but something was wrong. She typed, I don't know. It's just quiet. I'll figure it out tomorrow. The sun was barely breaking through the thick clouds when Khloe woke up in her old room. She lay there, looking up at the stars on the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house. The blender in the kitchen hummed like a jet engine. Khloe came downstairs, rubbing her eyes, still jet-lagged from the flight. Madison stood at the counter in bright blue leggings and a sports bra, pouring a green smoothie into a workout bottle. Good morning, sleepyhead, Madison smiled, but her gaze immediately darted to her sports watch. I thought students got up earlier. Not after 3 hours on a plane, Khloe yawned, plopping down on a chair at the kitchen island. She glanced at Ethan's empty seat. Did Dad leave yet? Madison nodded, screwing the cap on the bottle. Rushed to the office at 7 in the morning. Some kind of crisis with reports. She shrugged, but her fingers squeezed the bottle a little tighter than necessary. Want a smoothie? Spinach, banana, protein. I'm going to get some cereal, Khloe said, reaching into the shelf and pulling out a box. She poured herself a bowl, splashed some milk, and looked at her mother, who was packing her gym bag. Are you going to practice again? Yeah, track day today. Madison slung her bag over her shoulder. Jordan promised a new race plan. If I'm not back by lunch, there's food in the fridge, okay? Khloe nodded, but her chest hurt. Her mother left too often. She wanted to ask about training, but instead she said, "Mom, do you even talk to Dad?" Her voice sounded harsher than she intended. Madison paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She turned around, and for a second her face became serious, but then it softened. "Of course we talk. It's just, he's busy, I'm busy. Life, you know." She smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "Don't worry, Khloe. Everything's fine." The door slammed and Madison was gone. Khloe sat there, picking at her cereal, which was now soggy. "It's fine" sounded like day-old pasta, unconvincing. She pulled out her phone and dialed Ethan. "Hi, Khloe." Her father's voice was hoarse, and the office was humming in the background. Calls, voices, the clicking of keys. "Are you settled in yet?" "Yeah, it's fine." Khloe tapped her spoon against her bowl. "Dad, can I come to your office? I want to see it and, well, chat." Ethan cleared his throat. Khloe imagined him rubbing his temple, like he always did when he was under pressure. "It's crazy today, Khloe. Investors from Asia are demanding reports, plus there's a bug in the financial model." He paused. "Let's do it tonight. I'll be back by 7. We'll have dinner." "Okay." Khloe swallowed her disappointment. "And is everything okay with Mom? She's always training." Ethan chuckled, a hint of mockery in his voice. "It's her new obsession. Triathlon, Jordan, all that stuff. Don't worry about it. She's just into it." He hesitated. "Listen, I have to take a call. I'll see you tonight, okay?" "Okay." Khloe hung up and stared at the phone, entertained. The word stung like her mother's "it's okay." She pushed the bowl away and decided that staying home wasn't an option. By midday, Khloe was sitting at a corner table by the window in a coffee shop in downtown Seattle. She opened her laptop to work on a script, but instead she went to Instagram. Madison's profile was filled with workout photos, her on a bike in a pool next to a guy in workout gear who was smiling widely. Khloe squinted at the caption. "Thanks to Jordan for the motivation. Ironman training." She clicked on Jordan's profile, a physical therapist, posts about muscle recovery and workout plans. Nothing out of the ordinary, but she was still nervous. Khloe leaned back in her chair, looking out the window at the people passing by. She wanted to talk to Madison again, but not on the phone. She dialed her mother's number. "Khloe." Madison was out of breath, the wind and tires rustling in the background. "I'm on the highway. What happened?" "Nothing. It's just..." Khloe hesitated, looking at her coffee cup. "When will you be home? I want to talk. About Dad, for example." Madison laughed, but it was forced. "About Dad? Khloe, he's just overwhelmed. The startup is like his second wife now." She cleared her throat. "I'll be back this evening. We'll talk over dinner, okay?" "Okay." Khloe squeezed the phone. "Mom, are you sure everything's okay?" "Sure," Madison answered too quickly. "Listen, there's a tricky turn here. We need to concentrate. See you tonight." The call ended. Khloe looked at the screen, where the message, "Call ended," flashed. She threw the phone on the table and rubbed her face with her hands. Her parents kept saying the same thing, but their words sounded like memorized lines from a bad script. She opened her laptop and started typing, but instead of the script, she typed, "They avoid each other, and I don't know why." Khloe returned home in the evening, hoping for a family dinner, but Ethan called at 6, apologizing the investor call was running late. Madison came home from practice at 8, her cheeks flushed and her hair wet. She dropped her bag by the door and went to shower without saying anything about dinner. Khloe sat on the couch with a plate of warmed-up pasta, staring at the TV, where an old sitcom was playing. The laughter off camera was annoying. Her parents weren't even trying to be together. She got up and headed for the stairs, determined to wait for Madison. But the bathroom was still noisy, and Ethan's voice was coming from his office, now with someone in Singapore. Khloe paused, holding onto the railing. She felt like she did when she was a child, afraid that her parents would forget to pick her up from school. Only now the fear was different, that they had forgotten how to be a family. Ethan Walker sat in his office, staring at his computer screen, where an Excel spreadsheet with financial projections blinked red. Outside, Seattle was drowning in gray morning light, but Ethan didn't notice the clouds or the reflection of skyscrapers in the glass. His fingers pounded the keyboard, but his mind was elsewhere. The dinner that never happened last night left a bitter taste in his mouth. Khloe was looking at him with such disappointment that he felt like the worst father of the year. And Madison, she didn't even try to pretend she wanted to be home. He rubbed his temples and opened his phone to check his calendar. He had 3 calls before lunch, 1 with Shanghai, 2 with local investors. But his eye caught a notification he hadn't seen before. Madison, fly to Hawaii with Jordan to acclimate for Ironman 70.3. The date was a week before the race. Ethan frowned. He knew about her triathlon, but a week in Hawaii? With this Jordan, he clicked on the event. Madison must have accidentally given him access to her calendar when they were planning Khloe's vacation. Ethan felt a twinge in his chest. He put his phone down and tried to go back to the spreadsheet, but the numbers were blurry. "Ethan, are you ready for the call?" His colleague, Sarah, poked her head in the door, holding a tablet. "Shanghai is on the line." "Yeah, right now," Ethan nodded, but his voice was distracted. He slammed his laptop shut and stood up, trying to shake Madison's calendar out of his head. The investor call dragged on painfully. Ethan talked about revenue growth and plans to scale, but his mind kept drifting back to Hawaii. Why hadn't Madison told him about the trip? He remembered her face the day before, flushed from training, distant, and Jordan, who always loomed in her stories. Ethan squeezed his pen until it cracked. After the call, he returned to his desk and opened his calendar again. The flight was booked for 2. He pictured Madison and Jordan at the airport, laughing, their duffel bags in tow. The image cut like a knife. He wanted to call her, ask her directly, but instead he dialed Khloe. "Dad?" The daughter's voice was sleepy. "Where are you? It's 11 already." In the office, Khloe. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Listen, do you know what's going on with Mom's trip to Hawaii?" Khloe was silent for a moment, and Ethan heard her rustling the blanket. She said something about Ironman. Like, she's training with this Jordan." "What?" "Nothing." Ethan tried to sound casual. "I just saw on her calendar that she was leaving a week early. She didn't mention that." "Really?" Khloe perked up. "She didn't tell me anything. Maybe it's for training. Jordan is her coach, I think." "Coach? Yeah," Ethan chuckled, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "Okay, Khloe, I was just checking. What are you doing today?" "I'm going to the coffee shop to work on the script." Khloe yawned. "Dad, are you coming to dinner tonight? No excuses?" Ethan chuckled, but inside he felt a squirm. "I'll try. I'll be home by 7. I promise." He hung up and stared at the phone. The promise sounded weak, even to him. He knew another call or report could keep him until midnight. But the thought of Madison flying off to Hawaii with some physical therapist burned more than any deadline. By lunchtime, Ethan was sitting in a conference room with his team, discussing strategy for the next round of investment. His phone was face down, but he kept glancing at it. Finally, when Sarah went out for coffee, he couldn't resist texting Madison. "I saw your calendar. A week in Hawaii with Jordan. When were you going to tell me?" He sent the message and immediately regretted it. The tone was sharp, almost accusatory, but there was no turning back. He waited for a response until Sarah returned with coffee, but the phone was silent. Ethan clenched his jaw and forced himself to focus on the presentation. At home, meanwhile, Khloe sat cross-legged on the couch, laptop in her lap. She tried to write a script, but her thoughts were in shambles. The conversations with her parents the night before had left her feeling like she was filming a movie where all the actors had forgotten their lines. She closed her laptop and went to the kitchen, where she found a note from Madison. "Gone to practice. Food in the fridge. Be back by 8. Khloe crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. She decided to take a walk to the local park, hoping the fresh air would clear her head. The park was crowded. Joggers, mothers pushing strollers, a couple of old people on a bench. Khloe sat down on the grass, pulled out a notebook, and began drawing a storyboard for her script. But instead of scenes from a fictional story, she drew Ethan staring at his laptop and Madison pedaling her bike. She sighed and slammed the notebook shut. When Khloe got home, she noticed that the kitchen still smelled like Madison's morning smoothie. She opened the refrigerator, but instead of eating, she pulled out her phone and called her mother. "Khloe," Madison answered on the third ring, her voice out of breath. "I'm at the velodrome. What's wrong?" "I just wanted to ask." Khloe hesitated, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. "You're coming to dinner tonight, right? Dad said he'd be home at 7. "Oh, Khloe," Madison sighed. "I'll try, but this might be a long practice. Jordan wants to work on the transition from bike to run. It's important for the race." "Racing," Khloe repeated, not hiding her irritation. "Mom, are you ever home?" Madison paused, and Khloe heard her clear her throat. "Sometimes, Khloe, it's kind of a season right now. Dad's at the office, I'm at practice. We're just busy." Her voice softened. "Look, I'll try to be there by 8, okay?" "Okay," Khloe answered quietly and hung up. She looked at her watch 5 o'clock. She had 2 hours to make something for dinner. She wanted them to finally sit down together like before. Ethan, meanwhile, sat in his office, checking his phone every 5 minutes. Madison hadn't responded. He reread his message and winced. Maybe she was training. Maybe she hadn't seen him. But another thought was running through his head. Maybe she just didn't care. He pulled up her Instagram, something he hadn't done in months. Her latest post was of her on her bike, smiling, with Jordan by her side, clapping her on the shoulder. The caption, "One more step toward Ironman. Thanks, Jordan." Ethan squeezed his phone so hard the screen flickered. "Ethan, are you with us?" Sarah looked across the table at him. "We need to close the forecast slide." "Yeah, I'm here." He put the phone down and forced a smile. But inside, he was seething. He decided he would talk to Madison today. Straight up. No hints. By 7 p.m., Khloe had set the table. Pasta with sauce from a jar, a salad from what she found in the fridge, and bread. She even put out some candles, hoping that would create some atmosphere. Ethan walked into the house at 7:15, hunched over, laptop tucked under his arm. "Khloe, did you cook this?" He raised his eyebrows in surprise, looking at the table. "You look like a chef." "I tried," Khloe smiled, but then asked, "Have you seen Mom? She promised to be here by 8. Ethan shook his head, placing his laptop on the couch. "I haven't seen her. She's probably with that." Again, he stopped short, noticing Khloe's gaze. "At practice, I mean." Khloe nodded, but her smile faded. They sat at the table, but ate in silence. Ethan kept checking his phone, hoping for a text from Madison. Khloe watched him, feeling her hopes for a normal dinner fading. At 8, Madison hadn't shown up. At 8:30, Ethan stood up, clearing his plate. "I'm going to the office, Khloe. I need to get ready for the morning call," he said, avoiding her gaze. Ethan Walker straightened his tie, looking in the mirror of his Austin hotel room. The city was ablaze outside, and the convention center across the street was already buzzing with the sounds of people attending the annual tech conference. Ethan had flown in that morning to pitch his startup to potential investors. But he couldn't shake the thought of Madison and her trip to Hawaii with Jordan. He still hadn't received a response to the text he'd sent 2 days ago, and it was burning more than he cared to admit. He rubbed his face, trying to focus, and walked out of the room. The convention center was crowded. Developers in hoodies, investors in suits, startup founders with bright eyes. Ethan made his way through the crowd to his booth, where his team was already laying out brochures. His colleague Sarah waved him over. "Ethan, are you ready?" She handed him the coffee. "First pitch in an hour. These guys from California look serious." "Ready," Ethan nodded, but his voice was dull. He picked up the coffee and took a sip, though the caffeine was already making him feel a little shaky. The pitch went smoothly. Ethan spoke confidently, numbers and charts pouring out of him like a memorized script. Investors nodded and asked questions, but he found himself answering on autopilot. After the pitch, he shook a few hands, exchanged business cards, and went to the bar to get some water. The crowd was buzzing, but Ethan felt cut off from the noise. "Ethan Walker, is that you?" A female voice behind him made him turn around. Brooke Caldwell, his childhood friend, stood before him. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and there was a familiar twinkle in her eyes. She smiled, and Ethan couldn't help but smile back. "Brooke," he set the bottle of water on the counter. "How old, damn it?" Since graduation, she laughed, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "You're a big boss now, huh? I saw your booth. Startup, investors, all that." "I'm trying," Ethan shrugged, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease a little. "And you, still writing novels?" "Not really." Brooke shook her head. "I'm a literary agent now. I help people write novels. I live here in Austin." "Really?" Ethan raised his eyebrows. "From Seattle to Austin. Quite a leap. Sometimes you need to shake things up." She winked. "Hey, are you busy? Got a couple hours before the next pitch. There's a blues show in town tonight. Great bar. Come on, clear your head." Ethan hesitated. He had another round of meetings scheduled, but the thought of sitting in a stuffy conference room made him feel nauseous. And Brooke was looking at him as if they were still teenagers who'd skipped class to hang out by the lake. "Okay," he nodded, "but only for an hour." The bar was a few blocks from the convention center, with scuffed wood floors and neon signs. A band was playing on stage, a guitarist strumming lazily and a singer belting out raucous blues. Ethan and Brooke sat at a table by the window and ordered beers. "So, tell me," Brooke leaned back in her chair, looking at him with interest. "How did you end up like this? CFO, startup, all business." Ethan chuckled, twirling the bottle in his hands. "Down to earth is the right word. I work 12 hours a day, sleep 5 if I'm lucky. The investors from Asia are driving me crazy." He took a sip. "But it's worth it. I hope so." "How's Madison?" Brooke leaned in a little closer. "You got married right out of college, right? How does she cope with your schedule?" Ethan tensed, but tried not to show it. "She's busy. She's into triathlons. She's training for the Ironman in Hawaii." He shrugged, but his voice betrayed a slight bitterness. "She's always training." "Triathlon," Brooke whistled. "That's cool." Madison was always energetic. I remember her lighting up the school dance. Ethan smiled, remembering Madison back, then laughing, hair down, dancing wildly. But the memory quickly gave way to an image from her Instagram. Her on a bike, with Jordan by her side. He shook the thought away and looked at Brooke. "And you? Husband, children, everything?" "Divorced 3 years ago," Brooke shrugged, but her voice was light. "No kids, but I have a dog and a bunch of manuscripts from authors. Living my life." She raised the bottle. "To old friends?" "To old friends," Ethan clinked glasses with her, and the tension in his chest eased a little. They chatted, jumping from memories of school to stories from her work and his startup. Brooke told them about the time one of her authors sent her a 1,000-page novel about talking cats, and Ethan shared the time an investor in Singapore wanted a report at 3 in the morning. For the first time in weeks, Ethan laughed without thinking about deadlines or Madison's silence. Brooke was the same as she had been as a child, easy, witty, with a slightly sarcastic smile. "Remember when we stole the key to the chemistry room?" Brooke giggled, finishing her beer. "Mr. Harris was so angry he almost burst." "Yeah, and you talked him into saying it was a science experiment." Ethan shook his head. "How did you ever get out of that?" "Talent," she winked. "Hey, do you still play poker? My friends and I get together on Fridays. Come join us if you're staying in Austin." Ethan shook his head. "I'm leaving tomorrow. But it was great to see you, Brooke. Really." "Likewise, Walker," she smiled, but her gaze grew serious. "You look tired." Remember to breathe, okay? Ethan nodded, but her words stung. He really couldn't remember the last time he'd breathed. They finished their beers, and Brooke suggested taking a photo. She held up her phone, and they both smiled at the camera, the bar in the background, the guitarist still playing. Brooke posted the photo on Instagram, tagging Ethan with the caption, "Old friends and the blues, best night out in a long time." The night was warm and windy when they left the bar. Ethan walked Brooke to her car, and they hugged goodbye, briefly and friendly. "Stay safe, Walker," she said as she got behind the wheel. "And say hi to Madison." "Sure," Ethan nodded, but his smile was tight. He watched her car pull away and pulled out his phone. No messages from Madison. He opened Instagram and saw Brooke's post. The photo looked too warm. He winced, imagining what Madison would think if she saw it. But then he remembered her calendar Hawaii, Jordan, a week together. He pocketed the phone and walked toward the hotel. Madison Walker wiped sweat from her brow as she sat on the side of the bike track. Her legs were buzzing from a 60-mile workout, and her water bottle was nearly empty. Jordan Gray, her coach, stood nearby, checking something on his tablet. The Seattle morning sun was unseasonably hot, and Madison squinted at him. "Well, champion," Jordan smiled, adjusting his cap. "You gave it your all today. A couple more runs like this, and Hawaii will be yours." "If I don't die first," Madison chuckled, taking a sip of water. "My legs feel like concrete right now." "It's temporary." Jordan sat down next to her, handing her an energy bar. "Eat it, you'll recover. There's a run tomorrow, so don't relax." Madison nodded, tearing open the package. She was grateful for Jordan's energy and support, but there was still a heavy feeling in her chest. Ethan hadn't responded to her last text, a quick "back by 8" before he left for Austin, and her own silence when he asked her about Hawaii had only made it worse. She wanted to explain that the trip was just an acclimation trip, but every time she picked up her phone, the words stuck. "Are you okay?" Jordan looked at her, noticing her thoughtful gaze. "You look like you're solving the world's problems." "I'm just tired," Madison shrugged, looking away. "And things are a little tense at home. Khloe's here, and Ethan and I are like on different planets." Jordan nodded without pressing. He always knew when not to ask questions. "Want to relieve stress?" He took out his phone. "Let's record a story. Show everyone how cool you are at pedaling." Madison laughed despite her tiredness. "Okay, but only if you don't yell, 'Come on, Madison,' like last time." Jordan grinned, picking up his phone. He took a short video of Madison with a bottle of water in her hand, smiling and waving at the camera against the backdrop of the track. Jordan added the caption, "Madison is tearing up the track. 100 km down, Ironman to go," and posted it to his Instagram, tagging her. "Done," he showed her the screen. "Now you're officially a star." Madison rolled her eyes, but smiled. She opened her Instagram to repost the video, and her eye caught a notification. A new post tagging her. She clicked and froze. Photo: Ethan at a bar, next to a woman with dark hair, both smiling. Caption: "Old friends and the blues, best night in a long time." Tagged at Ethan Walker. Madison clutched her phone, feeling the blood rush to her cheeks. "What's wrong?" Jordan noticed her reaction. "Nothing." Madison quickly turned off the screen and shoved the phone into her pocket. "It's just, Ethan's in Austin. He met someone." Jordan raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask. "Let's go stretch," he said, standing up. "Otherwise, you'll be limping tomorrow." Madison nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was stretching out on the grass while Jordan explained something about muscles, but Ethan's photo was in her mind. Who was this woman, and why did he look so happy? Meanwhile, in Austin, Ethan returned to the convention center after meeting with Brooke. He was at his booth, answering questions from an investor, but his mind was on the night before. Brooke had reminded him of a simpler time: no startups, no late-night calls, and no silence from Madison. He pulled out his phone to see if she'd answered, but all he saw was a notification from Instagram. Someone had tagged him in a story. He opened the app and felt his jaw clench. Video. Madison sits on the side of the track, smiling, waving at the camera. Jordan is next to him, his voiceover. Madison is tearing up the track. Caption, 100 kilometers down, Ironman to go. Ethan watched Jordan clap Madison on the shoulder, and his insides began to boil. He knew it was probably just a workout, but the video looked too close. He locked the phone and shoved it in his pocket, ignoring the investor's question. Ethan, Sarah, his colleague, touched his shoulder. "Are you okay? You look like you ate a lemon." "It's okay," he muttered, forcing himself to smile. "I'm just tired." But he wasn't okay. The video of Jordan played in his head like a broken record. He wanted to call Madison, ask what the hell was going on, but instead he opened his laptop and started typing a report. Work was the only distraction. At home in Seattle, Khloe sat in her room, legs crossed on her bed, laptop in her lap. She tried to edit her script, but her mind kept wandering to her parents. The dinner that never happened last night left her feeling like she'd blown an important scene. She sighed and opened Instagram to distract herself. The first thing she saw was Jordan's story, his mom, tired but smiling, on a bike course. Khloe smiled, but then stumbled across another post. Ethan at a bar with a woman. She clicked on the profile. Brooke Caldwell, a literary agent in Austin. The caption about old friends didn't explain anything. Khloe frowned and called Madison. "Khloe?" Madison answered on the second ring, her voice tense. "I just got off practice. What happened?" "Mom, have you seen Dad's Instagram?" Khloe fidgeted with the edge of her blanket. "He's in Austin with some woman. Who's Brooke?" Madison paused, and Khloe heard her exhale. "Brooke?" Her voice sharpened. "She's a childhood friend, I guess. He mentioned her a couple of times. It's okay, Khloe." "Are you sure?" Khloe frowned. "They look like they're, I don't know, too happy." "Khloe, don't make things up," Madison answered too quickly. "Dad's at a conference, ran into an old friend. Happens." She cleared her throat. "I'll be home in an hour. Let's talk, okay?" "Okay," Khloe hung up, her fingers still clutching the phone. Her mother's voice was unconvincing, as if she herself was unsure of something. Madison, meanwhile, sat in her car, parked at the track. She opened Instagram and looked again at the photo of Ethan and Brooke. Her fingers shook as she zoomed in. They were close, too close. She wanted to text Ethan to ask who these old friends were, but instead she threw her phone on the passenger seat. She needed to get home to Khloe. Maybe her daughter would help her take her mind off things. Ethan, back in the hotel room, lay down on the bed with his shoes on. He opened Instagram and watched Madison's video again. Jordan seemed too friendly, too involved. Ethan knew it was irrational, but every frame felt like proof that Madison was pulling away. He wanted to call her, but instead he texted Brooke. "Thanks for last night. It was great catching up with old times." He sent the text and immediately regretted it. What if Madison saw? But then he remembered her silence on his Hawaii text and left it at that. Khloe sat in her room, scrolling through Instagram, switching between her parents' posts. She felt like she was filming a documentary where everyone was hiding something. She wanted to throw another dinner party, but after last night, she wasn't sure it would work. She closed her laptop and went down to the kitchen, deciding to cook something to lure Madison home. Khloe was cutting tomatoes for a salad when Madison walked into the house. The smell of garlic was already filling the kitchen. "Khloe, are you cooking?" Madison asked, surprised, dropping her bag by the door. "What's the occasion?" "I just want us to eat together," Khloe shrugged, not looking at her mother. "Dad said he'd be back tomorrow. Maybe it's just us today." Madison nodded, but her eyes were distant. She sat down at the table, fiddling with her watch strap. "Khloe, do you really think that Dad?" She hesitated. "Does he spend too much time with this Brooke?" Khloe froze, holding a knife over a tomato. "I don't know, Mom, but you saw his stories, and he saw yours with Jordan." She looked at Madison. "Do you even talk?" Madison pressed her lips together, but said nothing. She stood up to help with the salad, but her movements were jerky, as if she was angry at the vegetables. Khloe watched her, feeling her anxiety rise. She wanted to say something else, but Madison's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and looked away. "It's Jordan," she said quietly. "We need to answer him. He's talking about training." Khloe sat at the kitchen table, staring at the remains of the salad she'd made the night before. The plates were still untouched. Madison had gone to another workout, and Ethan had stayed in Austin until late that night. Khloe twirled her fork, trying to focus on the script open on her laptop, but the lines were blurry. Her thoughts were racing through her parents, her mom's sharp tone on the phone, her dad's evasive answers, their Instagram posts that only added fuel to the fire. She slammed the laptop shut and walked to the window, looking out at the driveway. Ethan was supposed to be home today. Maybe that would get them to talk. Ethan walked into the house around 6 in the evening, carrying a suitcase in one hand and a laptop in the other. His shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept all night. Khloe met him in the hallway, trying to smile. "Dad, you're back," she hugged him, smelling the airport and coffee. "How's Austin?" "Crazy," Ethan smiled tiredly, setting his suitcase down by the door. "Investors, pitches, the usual." He looked at her. "How are you? Is your mom home?" "At practice," Khloe shrugged, trying not to show her disappointment. "She said she'd be there by 7. Ethan nodded, but his lips pressed together. He walked into the kitchen, throwing his laptop on the table. Khloe saw him glance at his phone, but the screen remained dark. She wanted to ask about Brooke, but decided to wait for Madison. Maybe if they sat together, it would all become clear. Madison returned at 7:15, her hair damp with sweat and a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She dropped the bag by the door and paused when she saw Ethan at the table. "Oh, you're home," she said, her voice even but her eyes avoiding him. "How was the conference?" "Fine," Ethan answered shortly, without looking up from his laptop. "And your training? Still tearing up the track with Jordan?" Madison froze, her hand on the refrigerator door. Khloe, sitting on the couch with a book, became wary. Ethan's tone wasn't just tired, it was sharp. "Yeah, I am." Madison grabbed a bottle of water and closed the fridge a little tighter than necessary. "And you looked like you had a great time in Austin. Brooke, blues, all that." Ethan looked up, his fingers frozen on the keyboard. "What do you mean?" His voice became quieter, but Khloe heard the tension in it. "I saw your Instagram, Ethan." Madison turned to him, crossing her arms. "A cozy evening with a childhood friend. Really sweet." Khloe clutched the book, her fingers turning white. She wanted to intervene, but something told her to remain silent. "So you didn't see my question about Hawaii?" Ethan slammed his laptop shut, his eyes narrowing. "A week with Jordan, Madison. You didn't even bother to mention it." Madison snorted, turning back to the sink. "It's training, Ethan. Acclimation for the race. Jordan's my coach, in case you forgot." She clutched her water bottle. "And you seem to prefer cocktails with Brooke to family dinner." "Cocktails." Ethan stood up, his voice growing louder. "Brooke and I had a beer and reminisced about our high school days. And you? You're logging miles with that hot physiotherapist instead of being with Khloe." Khloe jumped up from the couch, the book falling to the floor. "Guys, stop." Her voice was shaking. "Do you even hear yourselves? You're not even trying to speak normally." Madison and Ethan fell silent, looking at her. Madison looked down, her cheeks flushed. Ethan rubbed his face, as if trying to rub away the tiredness. "Khloe, Madison started, but fell silent, unable to find the words. "It's not your fault, Khloe," Ethan sighed, his shoulders slumping. "We're just tired." "Tired?" Khloe clenched her fists. "You don't even look at each other. Mom, you're always training. Dad, you live in this laptop. What am I? Just furniture." Madison opened her mouth to answer, but her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was Jordan. She hung up, but Ethan noticed. "Your coach again?" He shook his head, his voice full of sarcasm. Of course, he's more important than dinner with the family. What about you, Ethan? Madison turned to him, her eyes flashing. When was the last time you were home before midnight? Or are you too busy saving your startup and chatting with Brooke at the bar? It was one night. Ethan slammed his fist on the table, and Khloe winced. And you? You've been living on this track with Jordan for 6 months now, like Khloe, and I don't exist. Because you're never here. Madison stepped toward him, her voice rising to a scream. You sleep in the office, Ethan. You didn't even notice me training for the race. I noticed. Ethan raised his voice. I noticed how you noticed Jordan. Every word you say is Jordan, Jordan, Jordan. Khloe backed up against the wall, her heart pounding. She'd never seen her parents like this. Their words were like blows, sharp and merciless. She wanted to scream for them to stop, but her throat was tight. You're unbearable. Madison shook her head, her voice quieter but still shaking with anger. I'm going to bed. In the guest room. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, her footsteps echoing down the stairs. Ethan stood there, watching her go. His face was red, his fists still clenched. He turned to Khloe, but she shook her head. No, Dad, she said quietly. Just no. She retreated to her room, closing the door. She sat on her bed, hugging her knees and staring at the stars on the ceiling. They no longer felt cozy, just pieces of plastic that had long since lost their meaning. She heard Ethan walk into the study, slamming the door. The house that had once been her sanctuary now felt foreign. Madison lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Her heart was still pounding, and Ethan's words were playing in her head. Handsome physical therapist. She clutched her pillow, trying to push away the image of Ethan and Brooke at the bar. She knew Jordan was just a coach, but Ethan's accusations hurt. She wanted to call him, tell him he was wrong, but instead she just closed her eyes. Fatigue fell upon her like a heavy blanket. Ethan sat in his office, staring at the dark screen of his laptop. He wanted to go get Madison, apologize, but his pride held him back. He opened his phone and watched the video of Jordan and Madison again. Her smile seemed more alive in the frame than he had seen in a long time. He dropped the phone on the table and rubbed his face. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't know how to talk to his wife. Khloe woke up to the sound of her front door slamming. She sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes, and looked at the clock. It was 6 in the morning. The sun was barely shining through the curtains, and the house was quiet, like it had been the night before. Khloe pulled on a sweatshirt and went downstairs, hoping to catch Madison making her morning smoothie. But the kitchen was empty, just a note on the table. Flew to Hawaii. Be back after the race. Food in the fridge. Love, M. Khloe clutched the note, feeling something heavy in her chest. Her mom was gone without even saying goodbye. She walked into the living room, where her laptop lay on the couch, still open to the script. Khloe glanced at Ethan's closed office door. After the scream last night, she didn't know how to talk to him. She wanted to call Madison, ask why she'd left so suddenly, but instead she just made coffee. The black liquid bubbled in the coffee maker as Khloe sat at the table, staring at the note. Her fingers fiddled with the edge of the paper until it began to tear. Ethan came out of his office around 7, his shirt wrinkled and his eyes red as if he hadn't slept. He stopped when he saw Khloe at his desk. Good morning, Khloe, he said, his voice hoarse. You're early. Mom flew away. Khloe picked up the note without looking at him. To Hawaii with Jordan. Ethan froze, his hands shaking on the coffee pot. He turned slowly, his face tense. Already, he coughed, trying to hide his emotions. She didn't say anything today. I guess she didn't have time, Khloe shrugged, but her voice was sharp. You were yelling so much yesterday that she probably just ran away. Ethan clenched his jaw, but said nothing. He poured himself some coffee and sat down across from her, staring into the mug as if it held the answers. Khloe, He trailed off, rubbing his temple. Yesterday was too much. I didn't want you to hear it. But I heard, Khloe looked at him, her eyes glittering. You and Mom aren't even trying. She's gone, you're sitting in this office, and I'm supposed to just watch? Ethan opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. He wanted to say that everything would get better, but after yesterday, that would sound like a lie. Instead, he reached for his phone, checking for messages from Madison. The screen was blank. He gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I'll talk to her," he said finally, but his voice was quiet. "When she comes back." Khloe snorted, pushing her chair back. "Sure, Dad, like always." She stood up and went to her room, leaving Ethan alone. At the Seattle airport, Madison sat at the gate, her duffel bag at her feet. Jordan was scrolling on his phone next to her, his cap pulled down low. Madison stared out the window at the planes moving slowly down the runway. She could still feel the echoes of last night's argument, Ethan's words, his accusations, her own screaming. She wanted to call him, to explain that the trip to Hawaii was just for the race, but every time she picked up her phone, the photo of him and Brooke flashed before her eyes. She shoved the phone in her pocket and turned to the window. "Are you okay?" Jordan looked at her, putting his phone away. "You look like you're preparing for a war, not a race." "Just nerves," Madison forced a smile. "First Ironman, you know." Jordan nodded, but his gaze was intent. "If this is about yesterday's call," he lowered his voice, "I didn't mean to interrupt. But are you sure everything is okay? You were out of action yesterday." Madison sighed, fiddling with her watch strap. "Family matters," she said shortly. "Ethan, he thinks there's something between us. It's stupid, but—" She shook her head. "Never mind. Let's focus on the race." Jordan raised his hands in surrender. "Whatever you say, the coach listens." He smiled, "But if you want to talk, I'm here." Madison nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She pictured Ethan at home, with his laptop and the constant calls. And then Khloe, probably sitting alone, trying to figure out what was going on. Madison clenched her fists, feeling a pang of guilt. She had wanted to text her daughter, but the plane was calling for boarding, and she stood up, slinging her bag over her shoulder. At home, Khloe sat cross-legged on the couch, her laptop in her lap. She opened Instagram, hoping to distract herself, but instead came across Jordan's Instagram story. Madison at the airport, smiling, though her eyes were tired. The caption read, "Hawaii, here we come, Ironman 70. 3. Khloe pressed her lips together. She wanted to be happy for her mom, but all she felt was emptiness. She closed her laptop and walked into the kitchen, where Ethan was still sitting with his now cold mug of coffee. "Dad, are you going to the office?" she asked, opening the refrigerator. She needed to do something to keep her mind off her mother's note. "Yeah, in an hour." Ethan looked at her, his face gray. "Khloe, you don't think that I'm a bad father, do you?" Khloe froze, holding the yogurt. She turned, her gaze softening. "You're not bad, Dad. It's just, you're not here, and neither is Mom." She put the yogurt on the table. "I just want you two to be together, like before." Ethan nodded, but his eyes were empty. He wanted to say he would fix it, but the words stuck. Instead, he stood up, putting his mug in the sink. "I'll try, Khloe," he said quietly. "I promise." But Khloe just shook her head, walking into her room. She heard Ethan pack up his things and walk into the office, slamming the door behind him. The house was quiet again, too quiet. She lay down on her bed, looking up at the stars on the ceiling, and felt tears sting her eyes. She wanted to call Madison, but instead she just clutched her pillow. In Hawaii, Madison and Jordan landed in Kona after a long flight. The heat hit as soon as they stepped out of the airport, and Madison felt her shoulders relax in the sun. She wanted to focus on the race, but her fight with Ethan was on her mind. Jordan walked beside her, carrying her bike bag, chatting about the week's training plan. "Today, a light jog to shake off the flight," he said, opening the door of the rented car. "Tomorrow, we'll start with swimming. The sea here is warm, you'll like it." "Sounds like a plan," Madison smiled, but her voice was dull. She pulled out her phone, hoping for a text from Ethan or Khloe, but the screen was blank. She sighed and put the phone away. Ethan got home from work late, around 9 o'clock. He threw his keys on the table and noticed a note from Madison that Khloe had left in plain sight. He picked it up, read it again, and clenched it in his fist. He wanted to call Madison, but instead he opened his laptop to check his reports. But his fingers froze over the keyboard. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through her Instagram, where Jordan had already posted a new story. Madison running on the beach, her hair blowing in the wind. Ethan watched her laugh and felt something inside him break. He threw the phone on the table and went into his office, closing the door. Khloe, hearing her father return, went downstairs. She wanted to talk, but when she saw his closed door, she changed her mind. Khloe sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her phone. Morning light streamed through the window, but the room felt cold despite the sun. It had been a day since Madison had flown off to Hawaii, leaving only a note, and the house felt empty, like an abandoned movie set. Khloe replayed the conversation with Ethan the day before in her head, his tired eyes, his promise to try harder that sounded as empty as her mother's, "It's okay." She opened Instagram, but quickly closed the app, not wanting to see more workout stories. Instead, she dialed Madison's number. The beeps went on for a long time, and Khloe already thought that her mother would not answer. But finally, Madison's voice was heard, out of breath, with the sound of the sea in the background. "Khloe," Madison cleared her throat. "I'm out for a run. Is everything okay?" "No, it's not okay." Khloe clutched the phone, her voice shaking. "Mom, you left without even saying goodbye. Just a note? Seriously?" Madison fell silent and Khloe heard her steps slow. "Khloe, Madison exhaled. "I'm sorry. It happened so fast. I didn't mean to upset you." "What about Dad?" Khloe stood up, pacing the room. "You and him yell at each other, then you just go off to Hawaii with Jordan. Did you see the way he looked at your calendar yesterday? He's broken, Mom." "Broken," Madison chuckled, but her voice was strained. "Khloe, it's not that simple. Dad lives in his office, I live in my training. We're just in different worlds right now." "Where am I?" Khloe paused, her throat tightening. "I came home to be with you, and you're not even trying to be a family." Madison went silent again, and Khloe imagined her standing on the beach, looking out at the waves. She finally answered, her voice quieter. "Khloe, I didn't mean for this to happen. I'll call Dad, I promise. Just give me a few days. Racing, training, all this." She hesitated. "I'll come back and we'll figure it out." "Okay," Khloe swallowed, her fingers still clenched around the phone. "Just call him, Mom. Please." "I'll call," Madison answered more softly. "Love you, Khloe." "Me too." Khloe hung up and threw the phone on the bed. She felt like she was trying to glue a broken vase back together, but the pieces wouldn't stay together. Downstairs, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, staring at his cold coffee. He'd been up most of the night, replaying the fight with Madison in his head. Her words, "You're never here," cut like a knife. He knew she was right, but her trip with Jordan felt like a betrayal. He opened his laptop to distract himself, but instead of checking his reports, he found Instagram. Jordan's latest story, Madison swimming in the ocean, her movements confident, her face focused. Jordan was yelling encouragement off camera. Ethan clenched his jaw and slammed the laptop shut. He wanted to text Madison to ask why she wasn't answering, but instead he just stared at the note Khloe had left on his desk. "Gone to Hawaii. Be back after the race." He crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash, but it didn't help. He stood up, deciding to go to the office, where at least he could hide in the numbers. Khloe came downstairs, hearing the front door slam. Ethan left without a word. She sighed and went into the kitchen, where the coffee maker was still warm. She poured herself a cup, even though she hated the bitter taste, and sat down at the table. Her gaze fell on the trash can, where Madison's crumpled note lay. Khloe pulled it out, smoothed it out, and read it again. She wanted to believe that her mother would call her father, but after their fight, it seemed unlikely. She pulled out her phone and opened the voice message app. Her fingers shook as she wrote down, Mom, it's me. Dad is not an iron director right now. He's just sad. He's sitting alone, looking at your calendar as if you abandoned him. Please call him. I don't know what else to do. She sent the message and leaned back in her chair, feeling tears welling up. She quickly wiped her eyes, not wanting to cry. She needed to do something to distract herself. She decided to go to a coffee shop and work on her script. Maybe that would be a way to forget about the family drama. In Hawaii, Madison finished her run and sat on the beach, watching the waves. Jordan had gone to check the bikes, leaving her alone. She pulled out her phone to check her workout schedule, but instead saw a voicemail from Khloe. She turned it on, and her daughter's voice, shaky and full of worry, made her heart clench. Daddy's not being a great boss right now, he's just sad. Madison closed her eyes, feeling the guilt wash over her. She wanted to call Ethan, but her finger hovered over his number. What would she say? What had he gotten wrong about Jordan, that she didn't know why they were so distant? She put the phone away and stood up, brushing sand off her shorts. Jordan returned, carrying bottles of water. "Everything okay?" he asked, handing her one. "You look like you lost a medal." "Khloe," Madison sighed, taking the bottle. "She's worried about me and Ethan." Jordan nodded, his face becoming more serious. "Family matters are hard." He paused. "Want some advice? Call him, right now. Otherwise, it will only get worse." Madison looked at him, her brows furrowed. "Are you a family therapist now?" She tried to joke, but her voice was weak. "No, I just see you're struggling." Jordan shrugged. "I'm a coach, not a marriage destroyer. Talk to him, Madison." She nodded, but didn't pull out her phone. Instead, she walked toward the water to cool her feet. The waves licked her ankles, but thoughts of Khloe and Ethan wouldn't leave her. She'd promised to call her daughter, but every time she imagined Ethan's voice, the picture of him and Brooke flashed before her eyes. She clenched her fists and walked back to Jordan, deciding to focus on her workout. In Seattle, Khloe sat at a corner table by the window in a coffee shop. Her laptop was open, but the screen was blank. She drank coffee, her third that day, and watched the people walking by. Her phone was silent, no response from Madison, no messages from Ethan. She wanted to text her friend, but instead she opened notes and began writing. "Family is like a movie where everyone has forgotten their roles. Dad plays the director, Mom plays the athlete, and I'm just a spectator." She erased the text and closed the app. She needed to go home. Ethan, meanwhile, sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. His team was discussing a new report, but he wasn't listening. He opened his phone to check if Madison had responded, but all he saw was a notification from Instagram. Jordan's new story, Madison on the beach, laughing while he filmed her. Ethan squeezed the phone so hard the screen flickered. He wanted to text her, but instead he just locked the phone and went back to work. His fingers were tapping on the keyboard, but his mind was on Hawaii. Ethan Walker sat in his office, staring at the dark screen of his laptop. Outside, Seattle was drowning in gray evening light, and the house was so quiet he could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. It was the second day since Madison had left for Hawaii, and her silence was like a heavy blanket. He checked his phone every half hour, hoping for a message, but the screen remained blank. The voicemail from Khloe, which he had accidentally heard when she left her phone in the kitchen, was still playing in his head. "Dad isn't being a steely CEO right now, he's just sad." Ethan clenched his fists, guilt and anger warring inside him. He wanted to call Madison, but he stopped each time, remembering her stories with Jordan. His phone vibrated and Ethan grabbed it, expecting to see Madison's name. But the name that flashed on the screen was unfamiliar, Jordan Gray. Ethan frowned, his finger hovering over the hang-up button. Why was Coach Madison calling him? He pressed accept anyway. "Ethan, this is Jordan Gray." The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "I hope it's not too late." "What do you want?" Ethan answered more sharply than he intended, his hand tightening on the phone. "Look, I know you probably think I'm a problem." Jordan cleared his throat, his tone cautious. "But that's not why I'm calling." This is about Madison. Ethan tensed, his heart pounding. What's wrong with her? Is she okay? Yeah, she's fine. Physically, Jordan paused. But she's not in the race. I see her talking about you every day, about Khloe. She's worried, Ethan. And I thought, maybe you should fly out. Support her at the finish line. She needs it. Ethan froze, his fingers digging into the arm of his chair. He had expected anything an excuse, an explanation, but not this. His voice dropped. Why are you telling me this? You're her coach, not her family therapist. Jordan chuckled, but there was no mockery in his voice. Because I see her suffering. And I'm not one to break up families, Ethan. I'm just helping her run faster. He paused. The race is in 3 days. If you decide to come, let me know. I'll get you a seat in the stands. Ethan was silent, looking at his phone. He wanted to say that it was none of his business that Madison had flown away without saying a word. But Jordan's words, "She talks about you every day," had struck something deep inside. He cleared his throat, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Thank you for calling." "No problem," Jordan answered easily. "Good luck, Ethan." The line went silent. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts were racing. Jordan hadn't sounded threatening, but his words still cut through him. Madison was talking about him. Then why wasn't she responding? He opened her Instagram, where Jordan had posted a new story. Madison on her bike, her expression focused, sweat trickling down her temple. Ethan clenched his jaw and closed the app. He didn't know whether to believe Jordan, but the thought of seeing Madison at the finish line lit a spark in his head. Meanwhile, Khloe was sitting in her room, legs crossed on her bed. Her laptop was open, but the script hadn't moved. She was flipping through her notes where she'd written yesterday, "Family is like a movie where everyone has forgotten their lines." She erased the line, feeling her irritation turn to despair. Madison hadn't answered her voicemail, and Khloe wasn't sure if it had gotten through. She considered calling again, but instead went downstairs, hoping to find Ethan. She found him in his office, still holding the phone. His face was sullen, but his eyes were shining with something new. "Dad?" Khloe knocked on the doorframe. "Are you okay?" Ethan looked up, his lips twitching into a weak smile. "Yes, Khloe. Just thinking." He put the phone down. "How are you?" "Writing your script." "I tried," Khloe shrugged, sitting on the edge of the couch. "But it's not working. I keep thinking about you and Mom." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temple. "I know, Khloe. I—" He hesitated, looking at her. "I'm trying to figure out how to fix this." "Then call her," Khloe blurted, her voice sharpening. "She's in Hawaii, Dad, with Jordan, and you're sitting here staring at that damn phone." Ethan flinched but didn't answer. He wanted to tell her about Jordan's call, but decided against it. Khloe looked as lost as he felt. He stood up and walked over to her, putting his hand on her shoulder. "I'll figure it out, Khloe. I promise." His voice was quiet but firm. "Let's get pizza, like old times." Khloe nodded, but her eyes were wet. She wanted to believe her father, but after their fight, it was hard. They ordered pizza, and Ethan even turned off his laptop, which was rare. They sat in the living room, munching pepperoni and watching an old comedy. Khloe laughed at the jokes, but her thoughts were with Madison. She hoped that her voicemail would change something. In Hawaii, Madison stood on the beach, watching the sunset. Jordan had gone to the hotel to check his schedule, leaving her alone. She pulled out her phone and opened Khloe's voicemail, which she hadn't had the heart to listen to again. "Daddy's just sad." Her daughter's words cut like glass. Madison wanted to call Ethan, but her fingers froze over the screen. She remembered his accusations, "eating miles with your hot physical therapist," and her face flushed. She put the phone away and walked toward the water to cool her thoughts. Jordan returned carrying 2 bottles of water. "You're still thinking," he said, handing her one. "It doesn't help your legs, you know." Madison chuckled as she accepted the bottle. "You called Ethan," she said without looking at him. "I saw the notification on your phone." Jordan raised his hands as if in surrender. My fault. But someone had to make a move. He looked at her seriously. Madison, I'm the coach, not your enemy. And not his. Talk to him before things get worse. You don't understand, Madison shook her head. This isn't just a fight. We've lost each other. Then find him, Jordan shrugged. Or at least try, Forchlow. Madison nodded, but her throat tightened. She wanted to call, but the fear that Ethan would start accusing her again stopped her. She went to the room, leaving Jordan on the beach. Lying on the bed, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of the waves outside the window. Her phone was next to her, but she never picked it up. In Seattle, Ethan went to bed late after Khloe had gone to her room. He opened his phone again and listened to the voicemail from Jordan that he had saved. She needs this. He imagined Madison at the finish line, her face tired but happy. He wanted to be there, but he was wary. What if she didn't want to see him? He closed his eyes, clutching the phone, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like all was not lost. Khloe lay in her room, looking up at the stars on the ceiling. She didn't know about Jordan's call, but she felt like her father was hiding something. Her phone was silent. Madison hadn't answered. Khloe clutched her pillow, trying to push away the fear that their family was falling apart. Ethan Walker woke up with a pounding head, as if he'd spent the entire night arguing with himself. Jordan's call from the night before was still ringing in his ears. Fly out to support her at the finish line. She needs it. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, where the dim light of a Seattle morning filtered through the blinds. His phone was on the nightstand, and Ethan knew that one tap on the screen could change everything or nothing. He clenched his jaw, remembering the fight with Madison, her leaving without a goodbye, her Instagram stories with Jordan. But Khloe's words, "He's just sad," cut deeper. He didn't want to be the father his daughter saw broken. Ethan stood, rubbing the back of his neck, and went down to the kitchen. Khloe was still asleep, her door closed, and the house was silent except for the ticking of the clock. He made coffee, but instead of opening his laptop like he did every morning, he pulled out his phone and went to the airline's website. Flights to Hawaii, Kona. There was one tomorrow morning with a layover in LA. Ethan froze, his finger hovering over the buy button. He imagined Madison on the track, her face tired but determined, and then the look in her eyes if she saw him at the finish line. Would she be happy? Or would that just make things worse? He closed his eyes, clutched his phone, and hit buy. Footsteps sounded at the bottom of the stairs. Khloe walked into the kitchen, yawning, her hair disheveled, and holding an empty mug. "Dad, you're not in the office." She raised her eyebrows in surprise, putting her mug in the sink. "It's 10 already." "Took the day off," Ethan shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Got to do some stuff." Khloe narrowed her eyes as she sat down at the table. "Something." She crossed her arms. "Is it related to Mom?" Ethan cleared his throat, looking away. He hadn't wanted to tell Khloe about the ticket. He hadn't wanted her to get her hopes up in case things went wrong. But her gaze, sharp and demanding, left no chance. "Khloe, I." He hesitated, rubbing his temple. "I'm thinking about going to see her." "To Hawaii?" Khloe froze, her eyes widening. "Really?" She leaned forward. "You're going to her race?" "Dad, that's awesome. It's not cool until it works." Ethan shook his head, his voice quiet. "She might not want to see me, after everything." Khloe frowned, fiddling with the hem of her sweatshirt. "She will. I know." She paused. "I sent her a voicemail yesterday. Said you were, well, not okay." She didn't answer, but I'm sure she was listening. Ethan looked at his daughter, feeling a pang of guilt. Khloe had been trying to fix them, while he and Madison were only breaking them further. He nodded, squeezing her shoulder. "Thanks, Khloe. I'll try." He stood up, putting his mug away. "But don't tell her, okay? I want it to be unexpected." Khloe smiled, her eyes lighting up for the first time in days. "My lips are sealed," she said, making a lock on her mouth. "But, Dad, do it, please." Ethan nodded, feeling something warm ignite inside him. He went into his office to pack, but his thoughts were already on Hawaii. He pictured Madison on the track, her focused face, her strength. He wanted to be there, even if it meant risking another argument. In Hawaii, Madison stood by the pool where she and Jordan were practicing their swimming techniques. The morning sun was hot, and her skin was already flushed despite the sunscreen. She climbed out of the water, wiping her face with a towel, and looked at Jordan, who was recording her time on a tablet. "Not bad," he said, smiling. "A couple more swims like this, and you'll be ready for the ocean." Madison nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't get Khloe's voicemail out of her head. Dad's just sad. She wanted to call Ethan, but every time she picked up her phone, she was stopped by the thought of his photo with Brooke. What if he didn't want to see her anymore? She clutched the towel, feeling her chest tighten. "Madison, where are you?" Jordan waved his hand in front of her face. "You feel like you're on another planet." "Sorry," she shook her head, forcing a smile. "I'm just thinking about home." Jordan nodded, his gaze becoming more serious. "I called Ethan yesterday," he said quietly. "I said you needed support. I don't know if he'll listen, but I tried." Madison froze, her eyes widening. "What are you doing?" She gripped the towel tighter. "Jordan, why? It's none of your business. Maybe not my thing," he shrugged, not looking away. "But I can see how you're suffering. And Khloe, judging by her message too." Someone had to make a move. Madison opened her mouth to protest, but then stopped. She knew Jordan was right, but the thought of him talking to Ethan was a mixture of anger and relief. She turned away, looking out at the water, and muttered, "I hope you didn't make it worse." Jordan just chuckled and went to check her bike, leaving Madison alone. She pulled out her phone and opened Khloe's voicemail, listening to it again. Her daughter's voice was shaking, and every word was cutting. Madison clutched the phone, feeling tears welling up. She wanted to call Ethan, but instead she put the phone away and walked to the locker room. The race was in 2 days, and she couldn't afford to fall apart. In Seattle, Ethan sat at the airport, clutching his boarding pass. His suitcase was light, he'd packed only the essentials, hoping the trip wouldn't be too long. Khloe had stayed home, promising not to tell Madison. Ethan watched the departure board, his heart pounding. He didn't know what he'd say to his wife, if she'd even wanted to see him. But Jordan's words, "She talks about you every day," gave him a glimmer of hope. He opened his phone and texted Khloe, "I'm at the airport. Don't tell Mom. Love you." He sent the message and turned off his phone, not wanting to see a response. He was afraid he'd change his mind if he thought too much. The flight attendant announced boarding, and Ethan stood up, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. He walked toward the gate, feeling like every step he took was bringing him closer to something that could either save their marriage or destroy it completely. Khloe, sitting at home, received a text from Ethan and smiled despite being tired. She wanted to text Madison to tell her that her father was coming to see her, but she kept her promise. Instead, she opened her laptop and began writing a script, feeling for the first time in days that her story might have a happy ending. But deep down, she was afraid that it was just her imagination. In Hawaii, Madison finished her workout and sat in her hotel room, staring at her phone. She opened a chat with Ethan, her finger hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to text him that she missed him, that this was all a mistake, but instead she closed the app. She lay on her bed, listening to the waves crash outside, and tried to focus on the race. But thoughts of Ethan and Khloe clung to her, and she felt her resolve fading. Madison Walker stood at the start line for Ironman 70.3 in Kona, her heart pounding above the noise of the crowd. The Hawaiian sun was blazing down her spine, and sweat was already trickling down her back even before the race had even begun. She tightened the laces on her running shoes, checking them for the third time, and glanced at Jordan, who stood nearby, holding her bike. He nodded at her, his face calm but his eyes alert. "You're ready," he said, adjusting his cap. "Just keep up the pace, like in training. Don't rush right away." Madison nodded, but her mind was scattered. She'd been up most of the night, replaying Khloe's voicemail and Jordan's call to Ethan. She hadn't called her husband, as she'd promised her daughter. Her fingers fiddled with a race number pinned to her jersey. She wanted to focus on the race: 1.2 miles of swimming, 55 miles of biking, 13 miles of running, but the image of Ethan sitting in their kitchen, his eyes bleary, wouldn't go away. The start buzzer ripped through the air, and Madison raced toward the water with the crowd of athletes. The ocean was warm, but the waves were harder than she expected. She swam, trying to keep a rhythm, but each stroke felt harder than it had in training. Jordan had warned her that the ocean was not a swimming pool, but now she realized how right he was. She finished the swim, reaching the shore with aching arms, and ran to the transition area where her bike was waiting. The bike leg started better. Madison pedaled, feeling the wind cool her hot face. The landscape: volcanic rock, palm trees, blue sky flashed by, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were about Khloe, Ethan, their fight. She remembered his words, "You live with Jordan like we don't exist," and gripped the handlebars tighter. She wanted to prove that she could be strong, that triathlon was for her, but every kilometer felt like a step further from her family. By the time the running leg began, Madison's legs were feeling like lead. Jordan was standing in the transition area, handing her a bottle of water. "Well done, Madison," he shouted, clapping her on the shoulder. "Now there's the run. You can do it." She nodded, but her face was tense. The first few kilometers of the run were fueled by adrenaline, the crowd of spectators cheering her on, their cries merging into a roar. But at the 15th mile, something went wrong. Madison felt a sharp pain in her right leg, as if someone had pulled a string behind her knee. She slowed down, but the pain only increased with each step. She gritted her teeth, trying to keep going, but on the next turn, her leg buckled and she almost fell. Jordan, running along the track, noticed her limp and ran up to her. "Madison, stop!" He grabbed her arm, forcing her to stop. "What happened?" "Knee." Madison exhaled, her face contorted in pain. "Hamstring, I think." Jordan frowned as he felt her leg. Madison winced as he pressed just above her knee. "It's a sprain," he said, his voice firm. "You can't go on. We need to get to the infirmary." "No, I'll make it." Madison shook her head, her eyes shining with tears. "I've been preparing for months, Jordan. I'm not getting off." "You'll only make it worse." He looked her in the eyes. "Madison, this is not a failure. You made it to the running stage. That's a victory." Madison clenched her fists, her breathing heavy. She wanted to argue, but the pain in her leg throbbed like a hammer. The crowd around her continued to shout, and other runners passed her, their footsteps pounding in her ears. She nodded, not looking at Jordan, and let him lead her to the aid station. The tent was stuffy and smelled of antiseptic and sweat. Madison sat on a cot while a medic applied an ice pack to her knee. Jordan stood next to her, his arms crossed, his face serious. "You did everything you could," he said quietly. "No one expected you to become a champion the first time." Madison shook her head, her eyes wet. "I didn't run for a medal," she muttered, her voice shaking. "I wanted to prove to myself and to Ethan that I could do it." Jordan opened his mouth to reply, but stopped when he noticed someone at the entrance to the tent. Madison looked up, but her eyes were clouded with tears, and it took her a moment to realize who was standing in front of her. In Seattle, Khloe sat in a coffee shop, her laptop open to the script, but her fingers not touching the keys. She'd been following the race live on the Ironman website, but the signal was weak and the feed kept freezing. She saw Madison start the running leg, but then the feed cut to the leaders and Khloe lost sight of her. She clutched her phone, hoping for a text from her mom or dad, but the screen was silent. She knew Ethan had flown to Hawaii. He'd texted her before he left, but she didn't know if he'd gotten through to Madison. Khloe sighed and ordered another coffee, though she was already shaky from the caffeine. Ethan, meanwhile, landed in Kona early the next morning. He hadn't slept on the plane, his mind racing with what he was going to say to Madison. He took a cab to the track, clutching his backpack in his lap. The crowd at the race was huge, and he threaded his way through the spectators, trying to find Madison. He didn't know her bib number, but Jordan had texted him the transition zone. Ethan got there just in time for the running leg, but Madison had already left for the track. He stood at the barrier, peering at the runners until he spotted her, limping, her face contorted in pain. Ethan felt his heart tighten. He wanted to scream, but his voice was stuck. He saw Jordan run up to her, and together they headed for the aid station. Ethan followed, pushing through the crowd. At the infirmary, he stood at the entrance, breathing hard. Madison sat on the cot, her face wet with tears, and Jordan stood next to her, talking. Ethan clenched his fists, feeling a mixture of relief and fear. He took a step forward, unsure of what to say, but hoping his presence would make a difference. Madison looked up, her eyes widening as she recognized him. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Ethan stepped closer, his voice hoarse. Madison, he hesitated, holding the bottle of water he'd bought on the way. I'm here. Madison blinked, her tears coming harder. She wanted to ask why he was here, but instead she just nodded, clutching the compress on her knee. Jordan looked at Ethan and stepped back, giving them space. I'll go check the bike, he said quietly, and left the tent. Ethan sat down next to Madison, not knowing what to do with his hands. He wanted to hug her, but he was afraid she would push him away. Instead, he simply handed her a bottle of water. You're a good girl, he said quietly. You've come this far. Madison shook her head, her voice weak. I didn't make it, Ethan. I failed. He looked at her, his eyes soft. You didn't fail. You're here. That's more than I've ever done. Madison looked at him, her lip trembling. She wanted to say that she missed him, that she was afraid that everything had gone wrong, but the words stuck. Instead, she picked up the bottle and took a sip, feeling his presence warm her despite the pain in her leg and her heart. Madison sat on the cot in the medical tent, still clutching the bottle of water Ethan had handed her. The heat of Hawaii was oppressive despite the shade, and the compress on her knee was cold. She looked at Ethan sitting next to her, his shirt wrinkled and his face tired, but there was something new in his eyes, something she hadn't seen in a long time. Not anger, not accusation, but something soft, almost vulnerable. She wanted to ask why he was here, how he'd decided to come, but her throat was tight and the words wouldn't come. Ethan coughed, fiddling with the label on his bottle. I didn't know if I'd make it, he said quietly, looking at the floor. Jordan called, said you needed backup. Madison blinked, her brows furrowing. Jordan, she shook her head, her voice hoarse. He shouldn't have. It's none of his business. Maybe not his, Ethan shrugged, his eyes finally meeting hers. But I'm glad he did. Otherwise, I'd be sitting in Seattle staring at my laptop like an idiot. Madison smiled weakly, but her eyes were still shining with tears. She wanted to say that she missed him, that her own silence had been a mistake, but instead she just squeezed the bottle tighter. I thought you wouldn't want to see me, she muttered, looking away. After everything, after what I said. Ethan leaned closer, his hand trembling as if he wanted to touch her, but stopped. Madison, I said some shit too, he said, his voice low. I saw your stories with Jordan and... He trailed off, rubbing his temple. I thought you were leaving me. Madison's head snapped up, her eyes widening. Leaving? Ethan, Jordan is just a coach. I was training for a race, I didn't. She trailed off, her voice breaking. What about you? You're at the bar with Brooke, laughing like everything's okay, while I'm running around in circles. Ethan winced, his face turning red. Brooke's just a childhood friend. We met in Austin, had a beer, reminisced about school. He shook his head. It doesn't mean anything. But I saw your posts, Madison. You're with Jordan all the time. I thought you were happy without me. Madison swallowed, her fingers shaking. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but instead she just looked at him, feeling the tears welling up again. I'm not happy, Ethan, she said quietly. I tried to prove to myself that I could be more than just a mom and a wife, but I just messed it up. With you, with Khloe. Ethan was silent, his gaze softening. He finally reached out and took her hand, carefully, as if he was afraid she would push him away. But Madison didn't pull away, her fingers squeezing him in response. "You didn't screw anything up," he said, his voice firm despite his fatigue. "You made it to the running portion, Madison. That's more than I've ever done. And Khloe, she's proud of you. She told me so." Madison blinked, tears rolling down her cheeks. She remembered Khloe's voicemail, her voice shaking. "Daddy's just sad." She squeezed Ethan's hand tighter, her lips trembling. "I should have called you," she whispered. "Khloe asked me to, but I chickened out." Ethan nodded, his thumb stroking her palm. "I chickened out too," he admitted. "I was sitting in the office, watching your stories and getting mad instead of just talking." He paused. "But I'm here, Madison. I want to fix this." Madison looked at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe that they could start over, but the fear still gnawed at her insides. She nodded, at a loss for words, and simply squeezed his hand. The doctor who checked her knee returned with an X-ray. "Nothing serious," he said, showing the picture. "A strained hamstring. Rest, ice, and you'll be fine in a couple of weeks. But you can't run yet." Madison nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and disappointment. She hadn't finished, but Ethan was here, and that meant more than a medal. She looked at him, her lips twitching into a weak smile. "Let's get out of here," she said quietly. "I want just to talk." Ethan nodded, helping her up. She leaned on his arm as they walked out of the tent, the Hawaiian heat feeling slightly less oppressive. The crowd around them was still shouting, but their voices were a distant hum. Madison and Ethan walked toward the nearest cafe, where the shade of the palm trees offered some respite. They sat down at a table, ordering coffee and water. Madison fiddled with the edge of her napkin, unsure where to begin. Ethan looked at her, his face open, without the usual mask of a businessman. "Madison," he began, his voice quiet. "I don't want things to go back to the way they were. I want them to be better. I got too caught up in the startup. I forgot that you and Khloe were more important." Madison nodded, her eyes shining. "And I got carried away by the race," she admitted. "I thought that if I proved to myself that I could do it then, I don't know, would I be happier? But I only distanced myself from you." Ethan leaned closer, his hand still holding hers. "We both screwed up," he said, his lips twitching into a smile. "But Khloe, she keeps us from forgetting that we're still family." Madison laughed, her laugh weak but genuine. "She's like a director yelling, 'Reshoot the scene,'" she said, wiping away tears. "I missed her, and you." Ethan squeezed her hand, his eyes warm. "Me too," he said. "Let's try this again, Madison. No yelling, no silence, just us." She nodded, feeling the heaviness in her chest begin to dissolve. They sat in silence, sipping coffee as the sun sank below the horizon. For the first time in months, the silence between them wasn't heavy, it was warm, like a promise. In Seattle, Khloe sat in her room, staring at her phone. She'd been watching the Ironman livestream, but the cameras had long since switched to the finishers, and she didn't know what had happened to Madison. She wanted to text her dad to ask if he'd found his mom, but she held back, afraid to scare away his hope. Instead, she opened her laptop and began writing a script, pouring out everything she felt. The loneliness, the fear, the glimmer of faith she'd had that her parents would find each other. Her phone finally vibrated, and Khloe grabbed it, seeing a text from Ethan. "Found her. She's okay, but she hurt her leg. We're talking. Thanks, Khloe." Khloe exhaled, her eyes filling with tears. She texted back, "Tell her I love her, and you too." She leaned back in her chair, feeling her heart beat lighter. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like their family might survive. In Hawaii, Ethan and Madison walked out of a cafe as the sky turned pink. Madison limped, leaning on his arm, but her face was calm. They stopped at the shore, looking at the waves. "Khloe," Madison suddenly turned to him. "We have to call her. She tried to save us." Ethan nodded, taking out his phone. He put it on speaker, and Khloe's voice, joyful and shaky, filled the air. Mom, Dad, are you together? Her voice was full of hope. Yes, Khloe, Madison smiled, her eyes shining. We're in this together, and we're going home, soon. Ethan and Madison's plane landed in Seattle late in the evening, the sky dark and the city lights reflecting off the wet asphalt from a recent rain. Madison sat by the window, her leg still bandaged, but the pain in her knee had eased with medication and rest. She looked at Ethan, dozing in the seat next to hers, his hand on the armrest, brushing her fingers. Their conversation in Hawaii, from the nurse's office to the coffee shop, still echoed in her head. They hadn't resolved everything, but for the first time in months, she felt like they were on the same page. As they walked out of the airport, the cold Seattle air hit her face, and Madison couldn't help but lean into Ethan. He smiled, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, and helped her to the taxi, carefully carrying her bag. They were silent in the car, but the silence wasn't heavy like before. It was cozy, like a warm blanket. Madison pulled out her phone and texted Khloe, "We're in Seattle. Be home soon." She glanced at Ethan, who was checking something on his phone, and squeezed his hand. "Did you tell Khloe we were coming back?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," Ethan nodded, putting his phone away. "She's probably already preparing a whole lecture for us." Madison chuckled, her lips twitching into a smile. "She deserved it. We let her down." Ethan looked at her, his gaze serious. "We'll get better, Madison. Both of us." She nodded, feeling her throat tighten. She wanted to believe they could do it, but the fear of old habits returning still clung to her. She turned to the window, watching the lights flash by, and promised herself she wouldn't let that fear win. At home, Khloe was rushing around the kitchen, trying to prepare something for her parents' reunion. She found some leftover pasta and sauce in the fridge, but ended up just ordering pizza, her signature, she joked. She set the table with 3 plates, candles, and even napkins folded into triangles like she'd seen in a movie. Her heart was pounding with anticipation, but also with anxiety. She was afraid that their reconciliation in Hawaii had just been a moment of weakness, and that things would return to fighting and silence at home. When the key turned in the lock, Khloe ran out into the hallway. Madison walked in first, limping but with a smile that seemed genuine. Ethan followed, carrying her bag and his backpack. Khloe froze, looking at them, and felt tears welling up. "You're back," she said, her voice shaking. "Together." Madison nodded, her eyes shining. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Khloe, holding her close. Khloe buried her face in her shoulder, smelling of sunscreen and the sea. "I'm sorry, Khloe," Madison whispered, her voice hoarse. "I shouldn't have left like that." Khloe shook her head, pulling back to look at her mother. "You were awesome, Mom. I saw the broadcast. You made it to the run. It's, it's incredible." Madison smiled, wiping the tears from her cheeks. "I didn't quite get there," she said, pointing to her bandaged leg. "But I tried." Ethan put the bags down by the door and walked over, putting his arm around Khloe's shoulders. "She was incredible, Khloe," he said, his voice warm. "And you made me go there. Thank you." Khloe looked at him, her lips twitching into a smile. "Someone had to shake you up," she said, trying to be funny, but her eyes were wet. They walked into the kitchen, where the table was waiting for them with pizza and candles. Khloe lit the candles, and the light from them made the room feel cozier. They sat down, and for the first time in months, it was a real family dinner. Ethan talked about his trip to Austin, leaving out his meeting with Brooke, and Madison shared stories about Hawaii, carefully avoiding the topic of Jordan. Khloe listened, munching on her pizza, and felt her heart lighten. They were still on thin ice, but they were together. After dinner, Madison and Ethan cleared away the dishes while Khloe sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She wanted to text her friend to tell her that her parents were home, but instead she opened her notes and wrote, "Family is like a movie where everyone is learning their roles all over again. Sometimes it's painful, but sometimes it's beautiful." She smiled as she closed the app and looked at her parents, who were talking quietly by the sink. Madison washed the dishes and Ethan dried them with a towel. Their movements were slow, almost cautious, as if they were afraid to break the fragile truce. "Do you really think we can?" Madison asked quietly, not looking at him. "Not go back to the way things were?" Ethan paused, holding the plate. He looked at her, his face serious but soft. "We have to, Madison," he said. "For Khloe. And for us. I don't want to lose you." Madison nodded, her eyes shining. She placed her wet hand on his, leaving a trail of foam. "Me too," she whispered. "But we need time. And fewer phones, okay?" Ethan laughed, his laugh light, almost like the old days. "We have a deal," he said. "And fewer startups. I promise." They finished cleaning up and Madison turned to Khloe, who was watching them from the couch. "Khloe," she called, her voice soft. "Let's go watch a movie, like before." Khloe smiled, her heart jumping. "Unless it's your favorite thriller, Mom," she said, standing up. "I'm all for a comedy." Ethan chuckled, sitting down next to Madison on the couch. "I'm all for comedy," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "But no laughing stock, Khloe. Pick something normal." Khloe laughed as she flipped through the catalog on the TV. They picked out an old comedy they'd watched when Khloe was little, and the three of them sat huddled together. It was a silly movie, but their laughter filled the room, and Khloe felt like the house was home again. She looked at her parents, Madison, cuddled up to Ethan, and Ethan, whose arm was on her shoulder, and smiled. This wasn't the end of their story, but perhaps the beginning of a new chapter. When the movie ended, Khloe yawned, feeling tiredness creeping in. She stood up, stretching. "Good night," she said, looking at her parents. "And don't fight, okay?" Madison smiled, her eyes warm. "We won't, Khloe," she said. "Good night." Ethan nodded, his gaze soft. "Sleep, director," he said, winking. "We'll shoot a new scene tomorrow." Khloe laughed and went into her room, closing the door. She lay down on her bed, looking up at the stars on the ceiling. They didn't seem like plastic anymore. They were glowing again, like they had been when she was a child. She closed her eyes, feeling hope grow in her chest. Their family was far from perfect, but they were together, and that was more than she could ask for. Madison and Ethan remained on the couch, staring at the dark TV screen. The silence was comfortable, but still fragile. Madison turned to Ethan, her hand still on his. "Are we okay?" she asked quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan looked at her, his eyes serious. "We have to," he said, "because I can't imagine life without you, and without Khloe." Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.